Hi, you're listening to Growing Up Weird with Gwen Bradbury and me, Greg Dickens. So Gwen, what is wrong with growing up weird this week?
This week we're talking about scalp and hair health, Greg. And we're talking about why growing up weird can make having good scalp health really hard. But let's start with some news, Greg. What have you been reading about this week?
I have depressing news. Can we start with depressing news?
Let's start low and go up, I think.
All right. The National Audit Office, who do their best to keep a track of everything that we as a country are getting right and wrong, released their 2019 to 2024 survey on antimicrobial resistance. As people may or may not know, the giving of antibiotics to bacteria often kills them, normally kills them, is designed to kill them. And when it doesn't, it makes them stronger than ever by giving them antimicrobial resistance. There is a growing school of thought that this will become an enormous medical problem in the future, and the NAO was tracking whether or not that's actually happening. It turns out, yes. Currently, antimicrobial resistance contributes to about 5 million deaths in the world every year, which is bad, but not the end of the world yet. However, looking at it, that'll probably double in the next 20-ish years, judging by the trends. So, with that in mind, the UK set itself 10 targets to reduce the development of antimicrobial resistance. And over the last 5 years, we have failed at 9 out of those 10 targets. That was what this paper was about. How well have we done? The one that we succeeded in, by the way, as a veterinary surgeon, I'm quite proud of, because that one was reducing the use of antimicrobials in meat production in farm animals. So, good job, vets and farmers. Well done. Woo! Anyway, why I found this really interesting is that their renewed "What should we do now" section leans quite heavily on reducing inappropriate usage during medicine. So they say that 20% of antibiotics prescribed shouldn't have been prescribed. 80%, still very good idea. If your doctor gives you antibiotics, 80% of the time, good move. You should take those because they'll help you. But 20% is enough for them to recommend reducing prophylaxis, giving antibiotics when there is no infection, just in case you get one in the future. And what I'd say that means is something that has cropped up again and again in this time of the microbiome, that population of bacteria in your gut, on your skin, in your lungs, etc. The more we know about that, the more important it seems to be, and the more we think, maybe giving antibiotics at the drop of a hat is a little more dangerous than we had thought in the long term. So, I think 20% is enough justification that if my doctor says, here are some antibiotics for you, I am probably going to say, do I really need these? And if my doctor says yes, then I'm going to take them. And if my doctor says, well, then I'm probably going to say, you know what, I'll leave them with you. So, a downer to start there. First piece of news, NAO says we're not doing so well against antimicrobial resistance. Do you have anything less sad, Gwen?
Yeah, I've got something much less sad. I've got one talking about how language acquisition in different cultures can look really different. And this caught my eye because it was a study of 120 kids aged between 3 months and 12 months in Accra in Ghana, which is where we spent quite a bit of time while we were waiting for the government to stamp our passports. Anyway, what this study found was that of this group of children who were, representative of children in the capital generally, they found that most of these kids had exposure to between 2 and 6 languages every day. And this really shapes how they develop language. But why it really stood out to me was that it highlighted how when we think about multilingualism or bilingualism in the West, in weird cultures, we typically think of it as, one parent, one language. It's parents who've have immigrated into the UK and who are trying to keep a piece of their culture. But that's actually really different to what this study discussed, because this study found that A, a lot of these languages are Ghanaian spoken languages that are not related to people's immigration status at all. And B, what I thought was really cool, most of the people who were talking to the infants spoke in more than one language at different points in the day. And that is so different to how babies acquire language in a Western culture. I just found this a really interesting example of why, when we think about a part of child development, say like bilingualism or multilingualism, if we think about it in Western cultures, we've got a whole host of other things that go along with that exposure. But actually, when we study it in a non-weird culture, we can find that those associations are really different. And so you start to wonder, are we even asking the same research question? So I just found it a really interesting example of something we saw very frequently when we were travelling, and a really nice example of why we need to make sure that we do more science outside of our little Western cultural bubble.
That's so true. What would that even be? Is that hexalingualism?
I have no idea. But given that the main language in Ghana is English, actually very few people talk to these kids in English. They just kind of heard it from media or things in the background. But that's like the official language, thanks to colonialism. It is fascinating how kids acquire language.
For podcast listeners who can't see Gwen doing air quotes, we need a noise or something, a little air quote noise. But no, you're absolutely right. And it's asking kids what the word for something is in the local language. They'll look at you and then you can see a cog in their brain go clunk as they're like, oh, they don't know how many local languages there are.
Yeah.
These people have no clue.
And then you go, oh, so is this word for duck the same as this word for lion? They'll be like, no, that one is that language and that one is that language. But only if they're old enough. The younger ones will just use the words interchangeably. Yeah. But the other thing it really highlights is that there are 2 to 6 languages exposed, but actually all the children have between 2 and 6 caregivers, and the two are not normally just the parents. Mm-hmm. So they have exposure to so many different adults who play a caregiving role. Again, that really shapes how your society works.
Yeah, we've talked about allo parents before. We're going to do it again.
Yeah.
All right. So to echo that in a very depressing way, you're talking about how important it is to get views from outside of a weird culture. Mm-hmm. Here's a paper that was published, what's the date today? This was published 5 days ago out of the University of Essex in a fantastic journal with the name Journal of Families, Relationships and Society.
Oh, crikey,
which
is a big one.
Kind of everything. By a fellow called John Day, who interviewed, and this is a massive sample size, so bear with me, 14 women. 14. It's a small paper. He does at the end say he's continuing with interviews. This is just an interim report. Give me a break. But these were all very much weird women. These are Brits. I think he chucked in a couple of Americans. But what's interesting is he has he's taken a sample, I think, 2 women from 7 different birth categories. So 1954 through 1961, 1961 through 1968, and then all the way up to 1994. Mm-hmm. That was the last birth. And the interviews are on parental roles, specifically relationships with fathers. Mm-hmm. What was done to create that relationship, what was done to maintain that relationship, and what the outcome of the relationship has been in terms of care given and, how you feel about your dad, basically. What I found was really interesting, that the strongest, by far, the strongest lasting relationships between fathers and daughters were formed by fathers who acted a bit like coaches and would take their daughters on long walks. And the author hypothesizes, I think I agree, although I'm not entirely sure he's got enough evidence to actually back this up, but it seems very sensible, that you're dealing with a society in which for blokey blokes, blokey men blokes, mm-hmm. to sit down and chat about feelings to young girls is not a masculine thing that a lot of men feel they can get away with societally. But to engage in hardcore sport and weightlifting and chat manly things is not a done thing that young girls can do societally. So the mid-ground, that halfway point is, let's go for a long walk together. And it was reported again and again in these interviews that fathers who went on long walks with their daughters ended up with very long-lasting relationships, which is adorable, yes, but also suggests something quite interesting to me. As we have looked at the long-term effects of various parts of weird upbringings, there's this duality of parenting, right, between providing the needs or meeting the needs of the kids right now. the caring, the nurturing, the feeding of small human beings. And then there's the other role, which is giving them stuff that will enable them to be healthy, effective, happy adults. And those two things are sometimes slightly at odds. So doing it as a single parent, or trying to do both if you are two parenting, or getting all those roles in amongst your big group of allo parents, whatever, there is a duality of role there that can be quite hard to do if you're one person. And it makes me think, I wonder if the best way for our society to do this is for one parent to concentrate on the caring and one parent to concentrate on the setting you up to have an awesome long life. Anyway, this is just Greg thought and Greg dribble, so try not to put it into practice without further peer-reviewed study. Talking of further peer-reviewed study, we should get on to shampoo and the scalp, because I know you have read hundreds of peer-reviewed papers on this. Where are we starting?
So let's start by just thinking about the scalp for a minute, because it's something, a part of our body that we don't see, we never see, we only really think about when it starts to go wrong. And it's something where we learned the habits that we have for cleaning and taking care of it probably a really long time ago, without really understanding what we're trying to achieve in the first place. And sure, when things start to go wrong, you tweak one aspect or another aspect or another aspect, or you hear a particularly enticing advert that changes a bit how you behave. But fundamentally, your views and your beliefs and your attitudes to your scalp were set a very long time ago. And what I really want to talk about is actually how the scalp is evolved to work, what goes wrong with it, and how we can think about looking after it in ways that set it up to work long term. Now, I'm going to ask you, Greg, how is a human scalp evolved to work?
That's an interesting question. I would say that a human scalp is the most mammalian bit of a human skin. I mean, we are weird amongst mammals in how bald we are. The top of our head is, in many people, different from that and much more like the rest of mammalia. So take this as all mammals, save the whales, obviously. So you're dealing with a system that is trying to play off two different needs against one another. One is the need for barrier. Skin has to protect the tissue underneath it. That's why it's there. It's protecting you from water loss. It's protecting you from solar irradiation. It's protecting you from a little bit of heat loss, more if you include the hair. It's protecting you from bacteria, viruses, fungi, etc. invading in. And it's protecting you from abrasion and like traumatic injury. It's tough stuff. But the flip side of all that protection is it also has to be really flexible. It can't get in the way of your movement. It can't get in the way of you being an animal. You know, the difference between us and plants and fungi is that we have to move. So it's got these two roles to fulfill. It does that by being overlapping plates on a really flexible basement membrane. These overlapping plates are filled with keratin, which is a really tough protein. It's the same stuff your fingernails and hair whatever. And in between these plates, these armoured plates, is a glue made of ceramide, which is a type of wax, and other oils, a structured oil or lipid profile gluing together protein armoured plates. These plates are made of cells, but they are no longer cells. They were cells about 20 days ago when they were born at the bottom of the skin. They then migrated up through the skin, losing their cellular integrity but gaining lots and lots of protein until what's left is the body of a cell filled with protein. It serves its time on the outside layer, fending off all the stuff that gets thrown at it, and eventually, when it's done, it flakes off and drops off one at a time. You're losing about 30,000 of these things every minute from your entire body surface, and you don't see them coming off in big flakes because they come off one by one. It's an invisible dust. It is the grey dust that you then hoover off your carpet. Sorry to say that. A lot of that is human skin cells, but they come off one at a time, so they're invisible. Anyway, that's a healthy scalp, and that's why it's evolved to do the job it is. Have I answered your question?
Yeah. Can you tell me a little bit about the microbiome as well? Because I think that's
certainly.
one thing that, when we think about microbiome, we typically think gut, then maybe we think skin, but then again, we only probably think about the bacteria on our scalps when something starts to go wrong.
Yeah. Oh man. So your scalp microbiome is dominated by two groups, the bacteria and the fungi. There are viruses and other weird little slime molds and all sorts of nonsense on our scalps, but the major things are a very famous fungus called Malassezia, which goes along chewing up a little bit of sebum, releasing chemicals that regulate other bacteria and fungi on the scalp, not really causing that much trouble. And there are bacteria called Corynebacteria, Propionibacter I think is another name for them. They also eat sebum, but they release bacteriostatic compounds and other stuff. They are, again, no trouble at all. And because you are covered in them, things like Staph aureus, which can become a problem, there's no real room for it to grow because all the niches are already filled with bacteria. The scalp microbiome, protecting you from MRSA since, year naught.
Yeah, love it. Thank you very much. Shall I talk about what goes wrong then?
Yeah, I mean, what is it that's causing things to go wrong? You've mentioned the word shampoo very briefly. I always assumed that human beings clean their hair mostly with wax and bones. What is shampoo and why do people use it?
So shampoo is something called a surfactant. So it's something that helps oils to dissolve in water, and that's how we get grease, but often also the grease that we produce, our own sebum, out of our hair. And so people have been using soaps for thousands of years, but recently we've learned how to make much more effective detergents, so much more effective surfactants to remove oil and grease. And we've also, with increasing availability of fresh water and water in our homes, we've had not only the ability to get oil really effectively off our head, but also the ability to wash our hair very, very frequently. So many of us wash our hair daily or at least several times a week. Now, shampoo is one of several things that we do to our scalp, which can really change how our scalp biology works. And there are a couple of reasons for this. Shampoo, as I said, is really good at getting oils to dissolve in water, so really good at removing oils. Now, the oils that shampoo is designed to remove particularly is sebum, which is a compound produced by our skin, which plays a variety of functions. It helps to feed the right microbes. It's a surfactant in its own right, so it helps our sweat to spread over our skin. It helps our skin cells to flake off at the right rate. It performs a whole load of jobs. But it also makes our hair look more greasy, especially if it's only on a specific part of the hair, and it changes how our hair feels. And so shampoo removes that sebum. But as you've talked about, there are loads of other different oils and lipids in that scalp that can be disrupted. So we're also talking about those ceramides and the oils, the lipid layers that surround your cells and glue them together. Those are oils. We're also talking about the oils within hair as well. So hair is a very complex system with keratin and with oils intrinsic to the structure as well.
There's oil inside my hair.
Yes, there is. And so this is why some of the studies on shampoo look at how it creates pores in the hair, disrupts the internal structure of the hair, and changes actually how the hair behaves, its shape, its shine, etc.
How can there be stuff inside my hair?
I know.
It's so thin.
It's so thin.
That's madness. Okay.
But so shampoo, it disrupts the oils that stick our cells together. It disrupts the oils that help our hair fibers to have their properties, but it also, and a really big thing, it also disrupts all of that colony of microbes that live on our scalp. And if we you mentioned that very well-known fungus, Malassezia. Yeah. Let's think about Malassezia for a moment. You're probably not very familiar, you probably have never met one face to face, but I'm going to tell you they wear these little waxy jackets, and that helps to protect them. It actually helps to cover the bits of them that make the body react. So if you want to have Malassezia on your skin and your scalp, which you definitely do because it makes it more flexible, more movable, and controls the rest of the microbes, you need to make sure that it's got a little waxy jacket on. But what happens when we put surfactant on it? We just strip away that waxy jacket.
Hang on a second. Did you say malassezia makes my scalp more flexible?
Yeah.
Tell me more. This is blowing my mind.
So the malassezia and the immune cells within your scalp have a very complex relationship. The malassezia helps the scalp to produce, it drives the scalp to produce certain antimicrobial compounds, but it also drives the scalp to produce a more flexible barrier. And I can't even remember exactly what the mechanism is, but certainly malassezia helps with scalp flexibility, not only microbial control and all sorts. They're happy little things that are supposed to be living on our head, outside our body, and just kind of, they've evolved with us, right? It's in their interests to have a stable, happy system. But anyway, so they've got these little waxy jackets. You put shampoo on, you strip away the waxy jackets. They also seem to make the sebum itself more irritant, whether that is because we have removed some of the bacteria, made the malassezia unhappy. You have more malassezia that is digesting the sebum to produce more irritant substances. But when you use shampoo, you disrupt the balance of the microbiome. You mean that malassezia overgrows, but you also make the malassezia themselves more inflammatory and more angry.
And you've started talking about irritants there, which is going back to exactly what I said about the barrier function. If you put a detergent on a barrier that's mostly made of, protein stuck together with oils, you're going to lose some of the bits of protein because you've dissolved the oils. The oil membrane itself is going to be more porous. The irritants are going to get through Is this what happens? You get scalp irritation and inflammation.
Yeah, and then what do you do when your scalp's irritated, Greg?
I put more shampoo on.
You put more shampoo, or maybe you scratch it. That's even worse.
No.
Then you've got your microbes going too deep. You've got your sebum going too deep. You've got a really disrupted barrier. The whole system starts to fall apart.
That sounds horrible. I've got 3 things written down which I saw as effects of shampoo on the scalp, which is discomfort, which I didn't get when I saw it written down, because I know you wash your hair when it's all itchy and it stops being all itchy, but I get now that it's actually causing it to be all itchy in the first place, and it wouldn't be all itchy if I hadn't put... Okay, I hate that, but I see it. I've also got thin, brittle hair written down. That's a result of long-lasting inflammation. Yeah,
so we do know that the general inflammatory state of your scalp changes how your hair grows, because your hair comes out of a little thing called a follicle. And if that follicle is surrounded by inflammatory cells and general inflammation, the hair that it produces is also compromised.
Which then just leaves the last one, which I've got a cross written next to, which is grey hair. Now, you don't have to cover this one. I looked this up. There was a Nature paper in 2021 talking about the effects of the sympathetic nervous system on the colour of your hair. You know that old wives' tale about how your hair goes white if you have a fright?
Yeah.
Turns out it's actually true. You freak people out enough, their sympathetic nervous system drives the replication of their melanocyte stem cell population at the bottom of their hair follicles, which are the cells that put the brown pigment into your hair. Lots of it if you've got black hair, not very much of it if you've got blonde hair. It drives those to replicate really fast and then exhaust themselves. So if you freak yourself out enough, you get white hair, which explains why I have gotten so grey since having children. Okay, so we're looking at discomfort and we're looking at thin, brittle hair. Those, I think, are 2 pretty good reasons to reduce the use of shampoo. But these have been known for a while. Why, as a society, are we still using so much shampoo?
Well, a couple of things going on there. First, as you said, when you've got an irritated, damaged scalp that's having more irritant produced by your microbes, more irritant crossing into your scalp, the thing that you can do to relieve the discomfort is to wash it again, because then you take away the irritant sebum and everything feels more comfortable. So firstly, it's really difficult to stop as an adult if you've previously started. There's a difference with kids, and we might talk about that a little bit later. But there are other things going on here. First, I said it's really hard to stop once you've started, but the other problem is that we start unconsciously. So most of us just start washing a baby's hair because we think that's something that you do, is something that is important, it's something that, is part of being a good parent. And despite never mind how much a baby or a child hates having their hair washed, we keep doing that. And then as the child hits puberty, and then as their sebum production starts to really increase, we end up in a situation where they've already got that very disrupted scalp ecosystem. And the third reason, though, is just because it is really culturally mandated in weird cultures to wash your hair very frequently. Anything else is seen as a big deviation from the norm. So actually it tends to be a very conscious choice that certain people make that signals some aspects of their own belief system, but it's certainly not the norm. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. 6 to 8 weeks is an interesting number for you to raise there, because that's roughly skin cell turnover time. I mentioned how these things are normal cells, and then they rise up through the ranks, getting fuller and fuller of protein, and then eventually fall off the top of your skin, right? That takes, in adulthood, it takes roughly 1 day for every year of your life. So if you're about 30 years old, it takes roughly 30 days for these things to be born, fill with protein, and fall off the top. If you are more like 60 years old, it takes more like 60 days for them to migrate their way through, which means that for a huge chunk of adulthood, they're taking between 6 and 8 weeks to migrate all the way out. I wonder if the effects of having your protective waxes ripped off echoes down through the ranks. We know that skin cell turnover is boosted when the skin is damaged, and to extend that military metaphor of ranks, new recruits are thrown right out to the front lines before they've been properly filled up with protein. I wonder if there's something going on there that means it takes a whole refresh of the skin cycle before your skin gets back to normal.
Fascinating.
Yeah, indeed. It's really quick in babies. It takes like 8 days.
Ah, that's really interesting. I hadn't looked at the skin turnover numbers. Another thing that I think we haven't mentioned, but if you have a look online about how often you should wash your hair, many dermatologists talk about the need to not only remove the sebum, which can be irritant, but also to protect yourself from things that are falling onto your hair or landing on your hair. And typically what's often talked about is air pollution. And this was really interesting to me. So I went away and I went through the literature looking for evidence on this, because we know that air pollution is a massive problem. We know it's linked to loads of different diseases. But what I was curious about was to how much the hair and scalp is a major route of exposure. And there are two types of air pollution. There are particulate pollution. There's particulate pollution. So these are the tiny little specks. Our major route of exposure to those is through the lung. And you know, we talked earlier, Greg, we talked about the stress on the scalp affecting your hair and affecting your scalp health. Yeah, so if you are breathing in a lot of air pollution, your body's in more of a state of stress and your scalp will be less happy, and therefore you've got health problems, but those are coming from the inside out. And the second kind of big category of air pollution is what's called volatile organic compounds.
VOCs.
So these are VOCs. These are gases, not little specks. And VOCs are actually really well absorbed across your skin. In fact, your skin is probably the major route of exposure to these compounds.
Is that true?
Yeah, which I didn't realise.
No,
that
me
was
neither.
pretty
That's
cool.
interesting.
But so then the question is, okay, so to what extent is your scalp a major route?
It depends if you're bald.
Depends if you're bald. Exactly what I was going to say. If you've got hair on your scalp, yes, your scalp's pretty protected. If you haven't got hair on your scalp, you're probably not going to be using shampoo. Maybe a rinse.
Just to shine it up.
But the other problem is actually wet washing with shampoo, or with soap on the skin is not great for getting VOCs out because they penetrate really quickly anyway. So the degree to which you're washing them is not particularly effective. But the thing that is likely to make you better able to deal with them is having a good barrier function.
Yeah,
so we end up coming right back to the beginning. So yeah, washing to try and remove air pollution is probably much less effective than just letting your scalp barrier do what it was designed to do.
Yeah, that's like mopping your house instead of putting a roof on when it's raining.
Yeah, exactly.
It's insane. Okay, yeah, that's really interesting because pollution was another reason I thought I should wash my hair. All right, we've talked about what your scalp's meant to do. We've talked about what shampoo does. We've talked about why you might not want it and why you might actually desperately need it occasionally because your scalp is itching like crazy and you're covered in soot. What we haven't talked about is the so what. What do we do? Adults who are washing our hair, we should do it what? Less often?
You can experiment, you can read up on it, and you can make a decision. But I think that the transition period is really hard for a lot of people. So I would in no way advocate that everyone should do a certain thing with adults.
And with kids?
With kids, I think it is different because there is no reason to be using shampoo on a child's scalp. I mentioned that their sebum production is so much lower that you don't need to be doing it for any aesthetic reasons, and you are compromising the health. So why not leave kids' hair alone unless it is covered in some kind of substance you want to get off? Just leave it alone. And then as sebum production starts to increase at puberty, as things start to change, then reevaluate. But childhood doesn't need to be about shampoo.
I like that. What it doesn't answer is actually one of the questions we got sent in by a listener. We didn't have a chance to do this last week, but I'm pretty sure we're going to do it every week from now. So anybody listening, chuck a question at me and I will chuck it at Gwen, and you'll get to listen to what happens when it hits her. But we have a question in which says, I don't know why I started washing my baby's hair. It was just what everyone does during baby baths, so I did it. How is it to break the shampoo cycle for a 6-month-old? I usually bath her like every 7 to 10 days. So, if you haven't started, great. But what do you do if you have?
If you have already started shampooing your baby's hair, don't panic. Everything can start to settle back and you can regain that scalp health. But the thing that you do need to do is stop washing it with shampoo. Occasional wet washing is fine, so just a rinse with water. But my rule of thumb is that if the baby has something on their head that is water soluble, use water. If the baby has something on their head that is oil soluble, use coconut oil.
And to be clear here, you're talking about something that's not meant to be here, not their barrier, right?
Not their barrier. Although cradle cap is a good example. A lot of reason that parents wash a baby's head is to remove cradle cap.
Okay.
Because it looks a bit dirty, doesn't it?
It looks like horrible gremlin alien stuff.
Exactly. Cradle cap does look pretty gross, but I think it actually has a function that maybe we haven't recognised yet. But I suspect, given when it occurs, which is at a point where a baby doesn't have much hair, I suspect it might be a sort of sunscreen. So, water soluble, use water. Oil soluble, use coconut oil. Coconut oil is a prebiotic. It helps to balance the scalp microbiome. And when we were travelling, we saw it used as a hair care product in lots of different cultures.
Well, that just about wraps it up. So, thank you very much, Gwen, for talking to me about hair and shampoo. And I really feel like I need to go and have a shower, but also like I really don't.
Every time we talk about scalps, I just find myself touching my hair and touching my scalp so much. So apologies if you've been itching away through this podcast.
Thank you very much. You have been listening to Growing Up Weird with Gwen Bradbury and me, Greg Dickens.